Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you very much for coming over here to sit in on this conversation. Like I said, I hope that we can get some insights from your history of racial integration to think through what the future of this community might look like as an inclusive community. This is all done in service of, I didn't tell you the name of the Community Voices is the website and the sort of the movement around telling community stories. The third voice is what we call this sort of podcasting. We say the third voice because Bill Bradley said years ago that there are three legs to the community stool, the government leg, the business leg, and the citizen leg. And he said the citizen leg, the third leg of the stool, is relatively weak in our country. Some would say very weak. So the thought here is get more community stories told, build the civic voice, help people learn from each other that in this situation intentional integration is possible. So not just to benefit your community, but benefit everybody who watches this to think through, we can do that and we can apply those lessons in our community. So what I would like to start with is the history. Oh, sure. Wait, hold on. Let me get, you never know. The questions might be better than the statements. So here, if you can grab this, and I will need somebody. Oh, sure. Yeah, sure.
Decide whether it should be recorded or not. But in the early days, one of the reasons Kennedy Heights became integrated is other communities such as Amberley, Hyde Park, Indian Hill, etc., were not open to.
Yeah, we got to have this. This is we're live. So we'll start there, and I'll just give this to you, Fritz, so you at least have got it. So we don't have time to hear the whole story straightforward. So what I'm looking for, and it doesn't have to be linear, are sort of the key moments, the key insights, the key scenes or situations that made intentional integration a success in Kennedy Heights. So you've got a key point to make about what happened here. So if you can speak into the mic, and that was, I think, a very insightful point.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in the early days of Kennedy Heights.
Even put the mic. You'll have to put the mic the closer to your mouth, the better.
Okay.
Thank you.
In the early days, in Cincinnati area, the upper level income, the upper income communities were not open to people of color. Kennedy Heights was one of the few neighborhoods where you had you could have the lifestyle of the upper income neighborhoods, but where it was just open, an open community. Something I remember one of our neighbors told my dad, this was back in the early 60s, as people of color moved into neighborhoods, the white folks who had been established there took off. And this gentleman told my dad that he wasn't going anywhere. There wasn't any place he could go that my dad couldn't afford.
Yeah, okay. So just that sense of openness.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, Fritz, if you can.
Okay.
She was asking for it, so ladies first.
Based on talking with Polly and Phil Redding, who were here when a lot of the agents were trying to get people to move out and sell to black folk. And so apparently both white and black agents were trying to get people to sell. And Polly Redding was one of the people who went to people and said, we're not moving anywhere. We hope that you will stay also, so that we really can have a diverse neighborhood and not just turn it over and all of the white people leave. And then she started in working with having teas so that as people moved in, people got together, got to know each other. At least that was the beginning. That was one of the beginnings. I'm sure there were lots of different ones. And then one of the things that happened was then a group of people who said that they wanted to establish a community council so that some of these gains could really take hold. And I think there were several different times that they tried to start something, and for whatever reason, it really didn't happen. But then in 1963, there was a group who were successful, and Dee Dee Starr was one of those people who made sure she called people from the city to help, and one of the persons, she went to the Urban League, and one of the persons who was there and called to come and help the community was Lois Conyers. And in her role, she was trying to help people understand, you know, what do we do to make this successful? And then after she was connecting with the community, she realized this is where I want to live. So later then she moved here, and she was also a president at one point of our community council. But in 1963, that was really then when the community council started, and really started in stabilizing by working together with people.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So it sounds like one of my neighbors put a sign, Caucasian woman, end white silence in her front yard when Black Lives Matter became a movement, and she was really challenging folks, white folks, to take a stand. And what can you do to take a stand? Is that what happened here in Kennedy Heights, that a white person said, well, wait a minute, I actually am not going to allow this kind of
Right.
racial
Yes.
bias, this kind of discrimination? Okay. Lydia's just put up.
One of the other things that happened along the lines of what she was talking about, this church, and I think the Baptist church too, but people organized, and they would have groups of people, mixed groups of people going around talking to people in the neighborhood, encouraging them not to move. And that was also a big part of the start of community council. That also led to starting the community council. I'm sorry, that also led to starting the community council. And it's, you know, for years we had community council, every year when we would change council presidents, it would be an African-American president one year, a white president one year, and back and forth and back and forth. And now we've gotten to the point that if we can get a president, we're
Yeah.
happy. But by the time I got here, they were still doing that. You know, just switching every year would be one or the other, would switch from one to the other. And it was very, you know, it was very, everything was very intentional.
Yeah.
Even to when our logo was yin yang, it was very intentional, the black, white, yin yang. And it was, you know, everybody really, you know, those things became our heart call, you know, this is who we are, this is what we stand for.
And that was, that idea of intentional integration was embedded into the community council? That was part of the sort of the founding
yes.
value
Uh-huh.
structure system of the community council? Okay, wow.
So one of the things that I want to say about the housing piece that happened is that the community council established a housing committee, and they had people who would go whenever anybody wanted to come and see something, see a house with an agent. That person from the housing committee followed them and was there so that they could give the input about, this is the kind of community you're coming into, and not relying on whatever the agent might say, because clearly there was a lot of redlining happening.
Yeah.
So-
And Lydia, you had mentioned a door-to-door, I mean, or were people literally, groups of people literally going door-to-door saying, hey, this is what we're about?
That's right, they were
Wow.
going
Yeah.
to talk to the neighborhood, that,
Yeah.
you know, you don't need to sell your house.
Yeah.
You know, we're gonna make this a good, diverse neighborhood. And people stopped, a lot of them stopped selling their homes and stayed. But in the beginning, there was a mad rush. You know, black people moving in, we better get out of here. But that didn't last very long because, like I said, they did get that little group of people together, and they would go from house to house, talking to people, saying, don't sell your house, stay here, be a part of something new and different.
Okay, great. Now, we know we've got, let me, I know, Fritz, if you could, Fritz, you did, I mean, you studied this, right?
Yeah.
Give a little bit about your background and why you know what you know,
Okay.
what you're about to tell us.
Okay, I'm Fritz Casey Leininger. I'm retired now, history faculty member at UC. I had the honor, and I say that, the honor of working with Kennedy Heights people 3 years ago. My students and I did the research and put together this book. And I think it's still available at the Art Center. And as I listened to these stories, you know, many of them helped make this book what it is. Just a little personal story. I first became aware of Kennedy Heights back in the late 70s when I was a hippie carpenter. And George Calamaris saw my ad, said, Fritz Leininger, carpenter. He thought, oh, he's going to get himself an old German craftsman. And I showed up, and my hair was even longer than it is now. But I was really impressed. The community council was in George's building at the corner of Kennedy and Montgomery. I was really impressed by the community. And when I had a opportunity, Ernie Barbeau contacted me and said, well, we're having a celebration for the 100th anniversary of the neighborhood of Kennedy Heights becoming a Cincinnati neighborhood, and could you come talk? And I said, have I got a deal for you? I have a class that will do the research and write a history of Kennedy Heights. So I was very honored to be asked to do that. I worked with Christine and Sister Karen and Ernie, of course, and a number of other people. I think rather than my try to tell an intimate story of Kennedy Heights, which is something you already are doing, is to try to put Kennedy Heights as an integrated community into a larger perspective. Kennedy Heights, North Avondale, Paddock Hills were about the only neighborhoods in Cincinnati in the late 50s and early 60s where middle-class black people could buy. It was legal and widely practiced for real estate agents to, well, the ads in the Inquirer and the Post said colored, unrestricted, restricted. You could map the boundaries between black neighborhoods and white neighborhoods with the real estate ads. And it was legal till 1965. So in the early 50s, the city of Cincinnati planned to build I-75 right through the middle of the West End, which was the old black community. Something like 65% of Cincinnati's black population lived in the West End. It was 80% black. And they planned to put 75 right through the middle of it. And they decided that the West End was an irredeemable slum. And the plan was to tear down the slum housing, put the highway through, and then it was like, oh, whoops, where are all these people going to go? So there were some attempts that didn't work out very well to find replacement housing for the tens of thousands of black families that were displaced from the West End. Neighborhoods like Avondale, which had historic pockets of African Americans living in them, Walnut Hills, became targets. These became places where the city and real estate agents started moving, encouraging black people to move. Between 1950 and 1960, Avondale south of the Mitchell-Dana corridor flipped. I mean, it was that fast from being a predominantly white community to being a predominantly black community. Because Avondale, Walnut Hills, Evanston were about the only places outside of public housing that blacks could find any place to live. And of course, the wealthy white communities were like, no, you're not moving in. But even working class white communities were, no, you're not moving in. But Kennedy Heights had really, it was a good, solid middle class community with good, solid housing. And because black people had more income than they had had before the war, they could start to afford to buy in places like North Avondale and Paddock Hills and Kennedy Heights. North Avondale, Paddock Hills, Kennedy Heights purposely created community councils. North Avondale was the first, I think, the first successful one in 1961. Not sure when Paddock Hills created their own separate Paddock Hills Assembly, Kennedy Heights, 1963. The problem, the reason it had to be intentional was that the demand amongst black people for good housing exceeded the supply. And it exceeded the supply because black people could not, even wealthy black people, could not move into Hyde Park or Indian Hill or Amberley or Clifton. And black people in general couldn't move into any neighborhood except for, you know, a handful. So how do you make it possible for there to be racially integrated community? And the only way to do that in the early 60s was to create community councils that made that happen.
Can we pivot from there?
And
And
let me just, one more
Okay,
point.
great.
I'm working up to this.
Okay.
Okay.
I figured.
So what's so important about the history of Kennedy Heights and the other intentionally integrated communities is you all made it clear that racial integration, stable racial integration, was possible. We found, and I've done some other studies where I just crunched numbers on white and black in Cincinnati and Hamilton County neighborhoods, and what we found is that there are a number of other communities that sort of accidentally have become racially integrated. And I'm looking at the block level, not just that there are black people in this corner and white people at this corner, but that they're pretty well mixed, kind of accidentally. There hasn't, you know, I live in a neighborhood called Spring Grove Village, used to be called Whitten Place. Not much intentionality there about creating an integrated community. But because you all pioneered, you created a community that was a good place for everybody to live and that was open. You made it possible for other neighborhoods to not have to do as much intentional work. And we see nationally, there are lots of now accidentally, racially, ethnically, class, diverse communities. But it wouldn't have happened if you all hadn't done that in Kennedy Heights and in North Avondale and in Paddock Hills and in other intentionally integrated neighborhoods all over the country. So I think that's one of the lessons of this history.
Yeah, that's great. That's great context. Yeah, thank you for that. And so let's get back to the how, right? Lydia had mentioned, you know, door to door. You mentioned showing up with the realtors, with a vision, basically. What were the other key how it became, the how of the intentionality?
The how was accidental in my case. We came from Portland, Oregon, drove straight across, knew nothing about Cincinnati. So my former husband was going to the conservatory. We didn't know where to look or who to call, and we just accidentally found that there was a place on Rogers Park, an apartment. And we signed the lease and I've lived on the street ever since. That was 1970. We had 2 little kids. We had a neighborhood of all kinds of children who are still good friends with my now middle-aged kids. And we had the opportunity to take in a foster child, a little baby who had been sorely abused. We fell in love with him. We were allowed to adopt him primarily because we lived in Kennedy Heights, because my heroes were and still are people like Dr. Martin Luther King, and there was no question about it. Well, my beautiful baby is now a very handsome man in his 40s, and he is biracial and has children who are darker than he is, and they've always been welcome in our home and in our neighborhood. Nobody has ever made us feel like we were doing something we shouldn't do. I love that about Kennedy Heights. I've lived there.
But you didn't know
lived
that
here.
when you signed the lease? Or when you,
No, what we knew was that we could afford the apartment just barely.
Okay, so then when you saw that diversity,
What I saw
liked that.
first, what really struck me, besides that there were some great kids in the neighborhood, was that there were some very high professional African-American families. We were by far the poorest family on the street at that time. And I loved that diversity too. I thought, we're the poor family. So I have grown over these 47 years immensely, and I can't imagine ever choosing to be in just a
So the
same
economic
everything.
diversity mattered to you as well?
It did, and now the age diversity
And now the
matters.
diversity, okay, great.
The adopted child, the mixed family, the works,
Okay.
and then these people at this church.
Okay, great. This gentleman, and if any, and then Ernie, yeah, here and Ernie, and then,
Well, I wanted to touch on that,
Yeah.
the community has always been economically integrated, and then also culturally integrated. Also culturally integrated. Off the top of my head, I can't specifically state any particular different cultures, but I grew up out here, and I went to school with all kinds of kids, and still maintain friendships with all types of folks that I grew up with out here. And it was never an issue as to, there are a lot of folks I grew up with where, unless it was we went to a wedding or a funeral or something, the idea of what religion they were was never an issue.
Mhm.
You know, we were friends. We grew up in the neighborhood. We liked the neighborhood. We like each other and the things each other
there was
are
contact,
into.
right? So there's something about, you mentioned something, it's almost like you could see the economic and racial diversity. You can see, you have contact with all kinds of different types of cultures and people.
Yeah.
So the contact is a key piece, just like the door-to-door is a key piece. If we can send that back to Ernie, I know,
Because Ernie can have it. My name is Sharon McQuarrie, and I was born and raised in Kennedy Heights. I am now 67 years old. I was here before all of the community council activity took place, and I went to Kennedy School. I went to Schroeder. I graduated from Woodward High School. But I lived down in, I'm a little nervous because this is emotional for me.
no, it's okay.
Because Kennedy Heights has been such a safe place for my family. I'm the oldest of 10 children. My mother passed away when I was 14 years old. And I'm trying to take a deep breath because it is.
Yeah, take your time.
I can think of no neighborhood that my family would have survived if it had not been for Kennedy Heights.
What was it about the neighborhood?
It was safe. It was safe. And my family went to First Baptist Church of Kennedy Heights, and of course they were wonderful. But I tell you what has been really like the catalyst, the spoke in the middle of the wheel, it has been this church, the First Presbyterian, Kennedy Heights Presbyterian Church, because of the fact that through grace, mercy, the Spirit, it was the place you came for brownies. When I went to Kennedy Heights, or Kennedy School, we came here for what they used to call church school. On Tuesday afternoon, we'd all walk down. Now, mind you, it was integrated. And mind you, too, when we went to Kennedy School, I was part of the group that, hey, when you went to school that first day, one of the questions your mom would ask you when you came in, how many colored kids are in your class?
Yeah.
You know, and at that time, back in the 50s, it was 1 or 2 or 3. You know, I don't know if that was
In regular
bad
school,
or good.
in the public school, the regular?
Yes, it was right
Yeah,
here on
yeah.
the corner
Yeah.
where the art center, where the art
Yeah.
annex is located now. A beautiful, wonderful school, but for whatever reason.
But this church, the church
But-
school was integrated.
But the church school was integrated, the schools
Wow.
was integrated.
Because you know what they still say today is the most segregated day of the week.
Is church.
Sunday.
Yeah.
So
But
that's
I have
really
to tell you
amazing.
an ugly side of Kennedy Heights before the integration happened. We knew as a colored community at that time, there were streets in Kennedy Heights that you dare not go down because you weren't invited. You weren't invited. You knew that you shouldn't go in that part of the neighborhood. And then when I, of course, graduated from high school and went away to Central State University and then came back, then it was more open. So that was 72.
Okay.
So that
Okay.
was at the time when it was starting
So
to open
in
up.
72, by then, you didn't feel the same sense of there are
No,
streets you don't
no,
go down?
no, no,
Okay.
because of the fact that it was getting more integrated. So that's my story.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you sharing.
I want to emphasize that what she said, particularly about the school.
You have to speak up a little bit, Ernie.
Okay. I want to speak a bit about what you just said about the school. That was a very key loss to this neighborhood because the schools serve as a focal point, not only for conversation, but for the neighborhood to get together. Another institution also that's been very critical, probably over the last 50 years at least, is this church. This has been the place for the neighborhood to have meetings. I understand that in earlier years, the First Baptist Church on Red Bank, which was established around 1907, was also very critical, particularly in terms of the development of the African American community in that area. There's two other hows also that have been very helpful. One is the newsletter.
Is the what?
The
Oh,
newsletter.
okay.
If you read the newsletter beginning approximately around 1964,
Wow.
it's a rich history. It reminds, I'm sure, folks who've been in the neighborhood much longer than I about the good old days, to say the least. Another new mechanism that was established about 25 years ago is the Progressive Dinner, which is held September, if I recall correctly, and it serves as an opportunity for people to meet new neighbors and at times to meet old neighbors that they haven't seen for 10 to 15 years. And that has always proven to be really a very marvelous experience for anybody who's been there. It's really rich, and I have a number of friends in other communities who ask, how did we ever pull that off? Because it's very unique to meet in other people's home for close-to-close encounters and conversations.
Which are powerful.
It's very, very
Intimacy
powerful.
there and a trust that gets developed. Yeah. Okay, great.
Oh, were you gonna go? Oh.
Okay, I was just going to
Yeah,
make
yeah,
a
you
comment
can- yeah.
about this church.
Yeah.
In doing enough of the interviews that I did, it was clear that at the beginning of all of this, establishing a biracial community that we've been talking about, this church was not ready to go. There was some very much, and Sharon would probably be able to talk about that. There was definite reticence. However, a minister came in, and I know he was here when we lived here, and I think he was from Iowa.
Don Peterson.
John Peterson, yes. And that he was the person who then apparently said, and some of you would know about this much more than I do. I know about it because I talk to people. And he led the way, and then changes started happening. So,
Okay.
you know, all these things take some time to happen. They don't just automatically happen.
Okay, yeah. Lydia?
I was just gonna add one more thing with the education piece. When I got here, Kennedy School was gone. When I got here, Kennedy School was gone. But I was just surrounded by people telling me stories about Kennedy School and, you know, how they didn't take their kids out of the schools because of this or that or the other. The school remained integrated until it was closed. And the other thing that was an amazing thing to me was the Kennedy Heights Montessori School that started, I don't know exactly where, but its early beginnings was here in this church also. And it was intentionally integrated. And there was scholarships for anybody, you know, but it was intentionally set up to be an integrated Montessori school and is still an integrated Montessori school and a big part of the community. I remember when I was getting schooling for my grandson, and they were saying to me, well, you're not entitled to a voucher because you've been sending him to a private school. I said, what private school? We haven't been going to a private school. It was the Montessori school. I said, no, that's just a neighborhood school. But that's how you think of the Montessori school.
It
as
was a neighborhood,
school.
it was for the neighborhood.
Yeah, and it was always integrated, and it was always a nice thing.
Why do you think white folks left their kids in the public school? Because a lot of folks send their...
It was a good school, but I
Okay.
also
A lot of times they
think
send
people
to
were
Catholic school, right?
dedicated to the public school system.
It was
a Okay.
good school. Yeah.
School was a great school.
Yeah,
Okay.
but,
Great teacher,
yeah,
a great, it was just a well-rounded.
So the community can stay together, rally around and commit to that kind of school.
Yeah, and I don't know that part, because as I said, when I came here, it was closed, but there were many neighbors on my street whose children had gone to that school, and they talked about it. And their thing was dedication to their public school, which was Kennedy School, and that's where they wanted their kids to go.
Okay, great.
Kennedy School closed?
That's a good question.
Yeah, the
Like I
question was
said, it
why
closed when I got here.
anybody know why Kennedy School was closed?
It was going down there. I know
Wait,
that.
wait, no, people can talk, they just need to talk into
I'm
the mic.
sorry. Yeah, my kids went to Kennedy, and as I ended up sending them to North Avondale because it was no longer integrated. They were the only white children in the school, and that was, as I told the principal, I believe in integration. This is no longer
Kennedy School
integrated.
became predominantly white?
Yeah, and this would have
It
been.
became predominantly black.
Black,
So there were
yeah.
still
Oh,
white
black- you
kids in
misspoke.
the
Yeah,
school.
but
Okay,
just-
became
just-
predominantly black.
Yeah, but there.
Magnet school program.
Yeah.
Wait, Lydia, give her the mic.
Sorry. I do believe that Kennedy School started going down possibly about 72, 73, 74 when magnet school programs opened, and that started taking out the better students, better families out and putting them in the magnet schools and leaving the children that didn't have that kind of parent involvement in Kennedy School.
Despite the fact that Kennedy School is good, they would still send them to the magnet school
Yes.
because that's the special,
The
yeah.
magnet school program had
That's
its good
interesting.
side and its bad side, and bad side was that it sucked goodness out of the community.
Can I ask Michelle Dillingham, is that historically true that magnet schools hurt neighborhood schools?
Well, I was just nodding my head vigorously because, this is just an example of the decline of investment in public education.
Yeah.
So this is just
Yeah,
and
okay.
this parsing out, which led to the decline of your
Okay.
neighborhood, which is interesting because here we are in 2017 with a new invigorated interest in getting back to neighborhood schools.
Yeah, okay, great.
That's why Woodford, I'm personally on the LSDMC of Woodford now, because that school, even up until a couple years ago, with the principal said, we're not interested in the neighborhood kids. Now that's completely turned around.
Okay.
We are very interested in getting the neighborhood
Yeah.
back in the school.
So let me just say just for the mic, Michelle, you said it reflects the disinvestment in neighborhood schools generally. Investment in magnet schools and other factors, I'm sure, drew kids out of those and left the neighborhood schools with less, which takes kids out. Okay, I got it. Ernie?
I will never forget the conversation that I had with a public school principal in our neighborhood when I was president of the community council, who said to me without blushing that she was not interested in having more students from Kennedy Heights because it didn't improve her scores.
Yeah, that's another, right, when scores become everything. Okay.
There is another community-based organization, though, we should make at least mention of. It's a sports-oriented group called KenSil.
Say again?
KenSil, because it stands for Kennedy Silverton.
Okay.
So it has a different age group orientation. It's one of those organizations that I really hope someone will do some research on how it developed and how basically why it started and what has happened to it over the last.
And what did it do for Kennedy Heights in this integration?
Athletics. Dita Barnes.
Pass it back. So it's an athletic organization,
it's
but
an
what did that do
yes.
for integration?
A lot, because of the fact that the children were playing sports together. And I wasn't in it, but my brothers, I have 5 brothers, and they all were involved with KenSil, and that might have been
Okay.
one of the things that saved them.
Sir?
Can I just jump in here?
Wait, hold on, Mike, you need the mic.
Okay. One of the things we discovered when we were working on the history, we were going through old Kennedy Heights newsletters, and we found this wonderful picture of 4 kids playing soccer, 2 white kids, 2 black kids. Shall I pass this around? You got,
Hold it up for the, so we can at least see it. Okay.
so.
Oh, no, for me, for the camera.
Oh, okay,
There. Okay, good. I got it. Thank you.
got it? So I just wanted to
Okay.
point out that there was a wonderful picture that helps.
So-
There's a little piece in here on the Ken Sill program. I'm sure it doesn't do it justice, but.
No, safety was mentioned about the community. And one of the things that made the community safe was we had community policing. The police officers in Kennedy Heights knew all the kids and who they belonged to. And we also had, as far as businesses went, anything you wanted to do, you could do within a mile of your home. We had grocery stores, gas stations, actual service stations. Literally anything you wanted to do, you could do with, well, depending on what kind of career you wanted, you could do within a mile of your home.
So we're about 35 minutes, and I want to move on to the future conversation, what this integration and inclusion looks like going forward. But the folks who did all the interviews, I just want to make sure, just almost from an academic standpoint, are there things, big themes that you would only know if you listened to however, 50 interviews or whatever it was? What did you learn that people should know that happened to make this neighborhood integrated intentionally over time? What were the key factors?
Well, one of the things that I think is important to know is that a family from Kennedy Heights was involved in the suit with the Cincinnati Public Schools to make it integrated, and it was Mona Bronson versus Cincinnati Public School. So her parents were Jeanette and Charles Bronson, and it was out of that suit that then the magnet school started as a way of making sure the whole city was integrated. So right here in this community, we have very much involvement in making sure that the whole city responded with being able to have those standards. And right now I'm blanking out. About Ken Sill that people brought up. I talked with Bob and Shirley Johnson, and they were the key people to really make Ken Sill happen. And I cannot quote you the statistic, but black kids couldn't be involved. They couldn't be involved in the league. They couldn't be involved in any of the soccer groups. So they worked at building teams, and it was a huge amount of teams. It was basketball, soccer, baseball, and this meant then that they could be integrated. So it was just a wonderful story.
Okay.
So those are two highlights.
Yeah. Any other big picture themes that? Yeah.
I'm sorry. The one thing we haven't mentioned that I think is really important, at the end of Kennedy and at Montgomery, we have the Geyer Apartments for special needs adults who can live independently with some assistance. And that, to me, is an inclusion that is hardly ever talked about. We are enriched by the people at Geyer.
So and so let's use that to shift to the future, right? That
Okay.
inclusion is bigger than race, which
Oh, yeah.
folks mentioned before we started recording. The first question I want to ask is, how does inclusion, what's the next level? Think 10 years from now, 20 years from now? What does an inclusive neighborhood look like? And specifically, what does Kennedy Heights look like 10 or 20 years from now if you continue to build on this inclusivity in a national context of volatile separation?
You know what, I'm really encouraged.
Microphone over, microphone.
Because I walk.
So
And
you're
I
encouraged,
walk
you
up
said.
and down. Yeah, I'm encouraged because up here at Kennedy Avenue, there were 2 homes, well, there's several homes, that have been emptied or empty. And there on the corner of Lunsford Place and Kennedy Avenue, we've got a new young family moving in and across the street. And we have a considerable number of Hispanic families that are moving into the area. So I am very encouraged. Down Zenzel, there were several homes that were vacant, and those homes have been renovated. On my street, I have homes that have been renovated and people have moved in. Now, they're they're just renters, but they are moving in. Young people like Rachel, how long have you been here?
2 years.
2 years. And we've got a couple of more young families that are moving in, so.
So,
I'm
so
encouraged.
youth in,
Yes.
in the Hispanic community would be
And-
part of a
And
more...
also white families too, you know, that
Is
are
this what,
moving in.
two-thirds African American?
Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
I moved to Kennedy Heights about 2.5 years ago, and this is a true story. When my realtor took me from Pleasant Ridge into Kennedy Heights, I was like, where are we? I don't know where I am. I'm so close to Oakley, which is where I'd lived for 10 years, but had no idea where I was. And when I looked at the house I ended up buying, I drove down the street, and there was an older gentleman working on his roses. He was trimming his roses. There was an older black guy and an older white guy, and they were just laughing and listening to music. And I went down the street a little bit further, and there was a family with their kids out front, and it was a little black boy and a little white boy running around in their front yard, and it was peaceful and quiet and beautiful, and I just knew this is where I want to live. Within a month, I came to a community council meeting. I got a welcome basket. All my neighbors from the street, who were all in their 60s or older, stopped by to welcome me into the neighborhood. I moved in July. By November, I was the vice president of the community council.
Yes. That's good nonprofit management right there.
Because I fell in love with the place, and I have never been in a situation where I needed people to help me feel included. It's just not something that I've dealt with, but the families in my neighborhood and that did reach out. It was my first time buying a house. I was younger than everyone on the street. I have no family. I knew I wanted to live in a diverse neighborhood, but I think just the inclusive nature of the people that live here is what will make Kennedy Heights continue to be a successfully intentional, diverse neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, and the word family really strikes me. I mean, you're really, the theme that I'm hearing is caring for your neighbor. You know, I'm my brother's keeper, right? We're everybody's keeper. Black, white, young, old, rich, poor, right?
Able and disabled.
Able and disabled. Yeah, more thoughts about what the future of Kennedy Heights looks like.
I think it's going to progress as it has been. As with our family, there are quite a few other families that are multi-generational here. At one time, we had 4 generations of our family living here, and my brother and my brother has a daughter, and my son both are fond of the neighborhood. And unless
How does the neighbor, so multi-generational, even more, get people to come back, go to
Yeah.
college, whatever, not go to college, but just come back, stay here.
Yeah. Most of the folks that I grew up with who stayed in town stayed in this general
Yeah.
area. Maybe not Kennedy Heights per se, but in the general area.
How does the neighborhood, if at all, need to evolve? What things could get better? Or what things need to shift in order to grow this sense of family and inclusivity? Or if you could pass that back to Ernie.
Yeah, I think that's a very big, fat question that has lots of layers, and some of it's very troubling. We don't have a particularly viable business district. It's sort of vanilla type, because you can't separate Kennedy Heights from Silverton. People will go through. I mean, I've had relatives go through and say, "Where's Kennedy Heights?" Even though they're right in the middle of it, because the business district doesn't have any distinctiveness. Now, it has the potential in terms of the cultural campus, but there's lots of other things that need to be done further along on Montgomery. Secondly, we have a housing stock that is not particularly appealing to the kind of demographics that we will have within 10 years.
Yeah, the open floor plans and... Yeah,
And some of them are not good for persons to age there, because they need so much upgrading that in terms of cost effectiveness, it doesn't work. You can't get a foundation, and you can't get enough of your own money to pull it off for many, many people. So I think part of the big fat question is, how do you make this a place to be a magnet for people wanting to come here? We have a logo, which is very, very helpful, but we need now to have lots of substance to that. Because if we don't, there's other neighborhoods who are going to beat us very easily. Look at what's happening to Madisonville. They are booming. They are booming. We need to find ways to capitalize on what are our strengths, and at the same time to be very honest and open about what are the challenges that we need to address to make this an attractive place for people not only to stay here, but almost more importantly, to come here.
So there are challenges in keeping the aging because of the housing stock, and how do you want to keep them,
That, and I think
and attracting the young in new
and I
residents.
think we also need to be more diverse than we are.
And
I'm
even
not
more
talking
diverse.
only about race. I'm also talking about other lifestyles, other orientations, other nationalities. I would love for us to have many Muslim in our community. I think it would be good to us to have the opportunity to interact with them, and for them in turn to be doing that. Because my worry is that we are becoming a much more segregated society, because I don't think it's only based upon race. I think there's other very cancerous kinds of segregation going on in our country. And I think neighbors like us have an opportunity to serve as a role model as to how it can and should be done.
Okay, got it. I'd love to, Michelle, if you want to say something, you've got to come up though, because we're on mic. So
I was just going to say something really quick. I live on Odin Avenue. My husband was born in
You
the
live in
house.
Kennedy Heights, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And my husband was born in the house we live in, and he knows everybody on the street pretty much. Like, usually, it was that way. We had the Great Recession, and we were really hit hard with the foreclosure. We had a lot of foreclosures on our street. And so then the banks bought the properties and flipped them, and some of them are still bank owned. And then they go to sheriff's sale, and then all the property values sort of drop. And so that's been a challenge. But what I was going to say is, this was my point that I ran up here to say, is that when I moved here 12 years ago, I think it was, or 15 years ago, I learned, just like coming to community council, I worked for a vice mayor, and he assigned me, go to your community council, I don't care where you live, you go and you get involved. And I was so blessed to land here, right? And I learned about the intentionalness of the diversity of this neighborhood. I learned it. I was taught it by people like Ernie and others, and Lydia, right? And what my fear for the future is that as new people move into this neighborhood, they might not understand what gem they've just moved into, because they might not learn it. And if people aren't there to teach them, they're not going to know. And they're just going to assume that it was always like this, or so it's like Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill. Like, to be safe and diverse and like feel like a family, that takes work. And if there's not new people coming in to do the work, we're going to lose it, right? So somehow I think we have to figure out as a neighborhood. And when Christine started the welcome basket thing, that was a way to, she would literally go on the auditor's website, find out who bought a house, and we would go there and say, hi, welcome to the neighborhood. Did you know that, where you've just moved into? And so we have to keep doing that, and that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. So you got to keep the momentum going, and somebody's got to do that, and it's generally got to be younger folks, or else you have to. It's the succession plan, right? Other thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things we need to do is get back on the city's radar. They're worried about a grocery store for the folks moving in on 4th Street downtown. That grocery store at 14th and Vine is a whole lot closer than any grocery store is to our neighborhood. Yeah, we need to get back on their radar and let them know we're here and we deserve consideration.
I think there's a candidate for council that might address those particular issues, but I don't want to say. Bill.
Marlene and I have lived in this neighborhood for only about 7 years. And we were attracted here because our daughter Ellen is executive director for the Kennedy Heights Arts Center. But one of the things that I have learned is that integration is more than people living in a neighborhood in houses. Integration is the opportunity to interact, to engage together in things that they mutually enjoy and support. And the Arts Center is, we go to almost all of the events there, and I'm just utterly amazed at the number of people in the community that participate in the events, and that the young kids, we were just up there for the end of the summer workshops, and it was almost 50-50 in terms of the racial integration, an opportunity for kids to interact, to get to know each other is so important in their maturing and growing up. And it's also important for adults to have the opportunity to work with people, to play with people, to have an opportunity to feel that they are part of a community, not just a neighborhood, but a community.
How many of you, I guess by, like we just did the eyes, would agree that the arts, and especially music, is a great way to get kids together, but all generations, right? It's an ancient human, yeah, it just, everybody's nodding for the benefit of the those watching at home. Right, and I know Ellen has done, one of the first things I did was write the story of the Arts Center, and one of the things they've been very clear about is to go outside their traditional mission to be part of things that integrate the community and get the African American community into what was kind of seen as a fine arts, and it wasn't attracting African Americans. So they went out of their way to make sure that they were part of those kinds of events. So those are great examples. The arts, some of the policy issues that folks have brought up, community of choice with housing. What are the other pieces that would continue to move the community forward when you think of a vision of a continually evolving intentional integration movement? Let me see if somebody, just because I know Ernie's got, no offense, Ernie, I just want to see if there's, oh good, so yeah, I would love to get more voices. Thank you very much, ma'am.
I was just going to say, my husband and I moved here 29 years ago and raised our children here and have grown to love the community completely. And aside from the racial diversity, I think that there's sort of an open-mindedness of many of the people in Kennedy Heights where accepting of differences. There's a lot of gay couples. There are gay couples raising children who feel very comfortable here with that sort of thing. And they're accepted. It's not even questioned. And I think that that's a vision for the world where people just accept people for who they are, and that's the direction we're going, and I think that's the direction the world is going to.
Well, thinking of where the world's going, I think it was Ernie mentioned Muslim, attracting Muslims, Hispanics, different ages, all those things, but just pick the Muslim community. Would that be another, I don't want to say target population, it sounds so sort of market-based, but would actually being active to recruit even more diversity that would sort of get at locally what the planet needs? Is that something that, what just struck you? If you give her the mic, and I'm just probing, right? I don't have an agenda here, but it just strikes me, it's like, wow, I mean, the planet needs some of that sort of, anyway, go ahead.
Well, I think that the Muslim community in the United States needs a safe place to live. And I remember being shattered to hear Imam Chartier of the Clifton Mosque talk about having something like 16 death threats over the last year, and how he has to explain to his 8-year-old, who sometimes answers the phone and hears these, why do people hate us so much, Daddy? Right. And it would be really wonderful if we were to visit the different mosques and talk about Kennedy Heights as a refuge, kind of an out-of-the-way, safe place to go home and decompress and not feel in danger. So I really like your idea, and I think we could do something about it.
Great. Other thoughts? Fritz?
So the question of marketing the community, Kennedy Heights did that in the 60s. There's we found an ad in either the Saturday Review or some other national magazine advertising Kennedy Heights as a good place to live. And that's something that, North Avondale did. They said if we're going to maintain a diverse neighborhood, we have to go market it to the people we want to move in. So there's certainly historical precedent. If it makes sense to extend the diversity of Kennedy Heights through recruiting Muslims, there's plenty of precedent for doing that in Kennedy Heights.
I live in East Price Hill, and there's a pretty large Hispanic population in East Price Hill that is very disconnected from the rest of the community.
Mm-hmm.
And I make a point in the Kroger to smile and wave at every Hispanic person just because you can just tell they're just, let's get real small so that nobody notices. I don't want to rock the boat. And, Price Hill doesn't have the most inclusive reputation. It kind of comes from a racist, by and large, there's some latent racism on the west side of town. And so they need a refuge, right? They need a place where they're really part of the larger community rather than they buy their own church and they can just not have to deal with that. And I know in Lower Price Hill, they got a lot of pushback. There was all kinds of robberies, armed robberies of Hispanics. The African-American community targeted, at least the gang members targeted Hispanics picking up, cashing their checks. So there's a real fear there that would be, I think, welcome, that kind of embracing. Other thoughts about any of this, though? Oh, in the youth, my sense is millennials have a real sense of purpose and mission around these larger global issues. And so to market this act local, address the global would work, right? I mean, the high school kids that I've been working with, that's all they want to do is they want to give back and serve. So anybody have any thoughts about that? Do you want to speak to that? Pass her the mic.
Pretty much just echo what Michelle said, which was my thoughts when Ernie was speaking. I agree with a business district and housing, but when I think about the future of Kennedy Heights and how we can continue past this older generation of people living in Kennedy Heights as being, it's such an amazing neighborhood, I do think it's about people knowing the story. When I read Fritz's book, when I got it in my welcome basket, that was what led to me volunteering on the community council within 2 months of moving, because I was proud I wanted to be a part of what was happening here and the history of what happened here. And I think that our Aging and Community Initiative that we're working on right now, we have some really dedicated people doing some amazing things that a lot of people are noticing and I think will change lives of people in Kennedy Heights. But I don't think it's possible for that to be a success if we don't get younger people involved in it. Right now, the people that are leading the initiatives are the seniors. So when they're the ones that need the help of the committee that's doing the work, where will we go? And I think the more we educate people on the history of Kennedy Heights and why it's so amazing now, the more young people will get involved, which will in turn, we'll be working on these committees and we'll take the reins as, we start losing some of our older community members.
It's a political statement, your choice of neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And I mean politics with a small p, right? You're making a statement. And over the Rhine, folks that moved there, they're making a statement. I'm going to rebuild the city and urbanism and all that. Moving here, it's like, wait a minute, integration is planetarily the most important thing that we can talk about.
Absolutely.
Right here and then back to Fritz, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways we could help there is, as has been mentioned before with the business district. 50 years ago, we had our own drugstore up at the corner. We had 2 mom and pop groceries up there. Then we had Redwood and Foster's back in the neighborhood. And we had our own dry cleaners up there too. Well, not our dry cleaners, but I mean.
Yeah.
But if we can get some kind of support for the small business, and that's happening all over the country. Small business is being run out by the bigger businesses, as much as our presidents tell us how great the small businesses build our country, but yet our government's doing everything they can to hamper small business, but that's
Yeah.
what makes a community strong.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Okay, so just a quick piggyback on that. I have daughters who grew up in an integrated environment, not in Kennedy Heights, but thanks to people like the folks in Kennedy Heights and North Avondale, Paddock Hills, who made it possible for there to be other integrated neighborhoods and for there to be integrated public schools. So my kids went to Fairview, racially mixed. They went to Walnut Hills, racially mixed. They grew up, because of the pioneers, perfectly comfortable with a variety of people. They both live in Walnut Hills, and so part of the reason they love it is that it has a vibrant business district. There's stuff to do, there are bars to go to, they can walk to stuff. So I think your point on having a viable business district is well taken. But I also wanted to say thank you to Kennedy Heights for having made it possible for my kids to grow up in a different neighborhood in an integrated environment. So.
Yeah, so a neighborhood of choice requires amenities in addition to some larger purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially for young folks that want to go out and they have they're not, I go home and garden, that's all I do now, right? Or, so, when I was 30 or 25, I had other things going on other than my garden. Other thoughts? Yes, ma'am. Bill, if you could, Thank you.
I think another thing that's going to aid the longevity of Kennedy Heights as an inclusive neighborhood is definitely going to include the youth, as was pointed out earlier. I work with the Kennedy Heights Youth Council, and a lot of the youths who are part of the Youth Council go to Schroeder High School, Schroeder Paideia High School, which was physically located in Kennedy Heights up until maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. And it's down the hill, technically, that's considered Columbia Township, but in their hearts and spirit, they still consider themselves part of Kennedy Heights. And some of the things that they have shared with me as far as what they would like to see in their neighborhood in Kennedy Heights are having things